Well, thank you all for coming. This is my opinion of what we're going to talk about today. And this is also aimed at small, medium business. So there's a lot of things that's going on in addition to this, and we'll probably touch on some of those things. But I'm not, for example, I'm not looking a lot at some of the wearable technologies, although we'll probably touch on that a little bit. We've all talked to death about the Internet of Things, all of that kind of thing. I'm really talking about what's the changes, what are the transitions happening this year that I think are meaningful to small, medium businesses. So really one of the key things I would say is this first point up here. It's evolution, not revolution. This year is going to be a lot of settling and continuing things that were started or getting ready for things that are coming. I don't see a huge amount of look at this huge new concept that hasn't been introduced before. Now, there's going to be, depending upon your company or your individual perspective, that could change. But so this is, I think, is going to be an evolution, not revolution. So according to CompTIA, which is one of the companies that does all the reports, all that kind of thing, focus groups, cloud has lost its magic. All right? And what I mean by that is it no longer brings out the anger, hate, fear, distrust, or love, absolute acceptance, no questions asked. It's now just another strategy. It's kind of the same place that virtualization was a couple years ago. When we first talked virtualization, nobody wanted to, I'm not going to run 2 servers on 1 physical box. That's crazy talk. The same thing is happening with the cloud. So we're at the point where we're no longer talking about it as if it is a unique strategy. And I was actually on a conference call that 2 of our guys were with a client. I had to phone in for about 2.5 hours. And one of the questions was cloud versus on-prem. And we weren't talking about the magic. We were talking about the mechanics. We were talking about the validation in terms of their current status quo, what it would take to change, what are the values economically. We never had to demonize it. We never had to make it a love fest, anything along those lines. Finally, we're talking about it like mature IT organizations. And that's one of the big things here. One of the studies IDC did, and I'm only pointing out a couple of them, and this is interesting, is half of IT spending will be cloud-based. Okay, now think about this, especially if you think about it in terms of capital. Because when we talk about on-premise, we're talking about capital expenditures. We're talking about buying boxes. We're talking about buying licenses. We're talking about creating the physical infrastructure to support. If we're talking about 50% of IT spending will be cloud-based, and one of the things we always talk about when we talk about cloud-based spending is how it's less costly up front. There's a ton more service expenditure that's going to happen in the cloud than is currently happening now. So the mindset of companies is changing. It has been, it will continue to do so. And this is especially going to be interesting, and I haven't seen a breakdown. I really want to see a breakdown of how different vertical industry segments work on this. Because you have situations, especially my favorite, manufacturing. I love manufacturing because, and it's the old joke, to manufacturing, it's obsolete if it doesn't turn on, And for companies to take that level of infrastructure and still integrate it into the cloud, it's a big to-do. So as far as cloud goes, these are the 2 things that I wanted to bring up. But you've also got issues such as public cloud versus private cloud. Public cloud being you're more caught up, you're using the vendors, you're using the organizations, Microsoft Azure, that you're part of an aggregate of organizations using the same resources but shared, as opposed to private cloud where you're actually renting out the space. You're actually going for a higher quality of service or the like. And one of the things that there is an interesting trend, a lot more companies are moving into private cloud. So you've almost got this transition where you've got everything on premise, you've got moving over to commodity services, email, backups, all that kind of fun stuff. Then you've got the actual line of business, critical services, where we're going to Azure, AWS, or the like. Then you've got this private cloud, which can actually use AWS and Azure as well as other services. So we're maturing, and we're also spreading around the actual products that are available and the way these products can be used. But What really comes down to it is when we have, if we're IT professionals, when we have conversations with customers, or if you're the customer, one of the big questions now is we need to start talking more and more about the business case and the business need, less about the technology. Okay, and that, to me, that's a welcome change. Another thing that I think is huge is security. Security used to be in my opinion, a checklist, relatively speaking. I got my and we're talking about small, medium businesses. I got my antivirus, I got my firewall, and I made sure they're both up to date. I'm covered. There's a lot more involved there. And again, and I said this, I think, either 2 or 3 years ago, that now that the bad guys have really found a great way to make money, that's the scary part. Forget the technology. But with ransomware especially, with all the crypto versions that are now out, and they're coming out with new ones every freaking day, you now have people who are they have incentive. They have financial incentive to do it smarter. So again, the whole ransomware is essentially to go in to effectively eliminate your access to your data and hold it ransom. They don't actually take the data off of your systems, they leave it there, but it's encrypted. And it's encrypted until you pay a fee, you pay the fee, they unencrypt it. And here's the catch, and this is the big catch. It's delivered in any number of ways, and we'll talk about that in a second, but it's a good product. FBI, fourth quarter last year, came out and said, we can't break it. We cannot decrypt an encrypted system. So if you're encrypted, you go to your backups, you pay the ransom. And we did. We had a company who contacted us. It was the first, I want to stress, they weren't using us before, but they got hit by ransomware. And it turned out then they checked their backups, and they hadn't had a good backup in 2 weeks. And it turned out in their case that they had an IT party who they thought was responsible for the backups, and they were actually said, yeah, we're doing good backups, and it turns out they weren't. So we were brought on, and we helped them pay the ransom. Because they started out with how can we fix this? And we said, do you have good backups? No, pay the ransom. Okay, but if we pay the ransom. And we literally had a conversation, I had a conversation with the CFO, and it was at the end of every question, it was pay the ransom. And the ransom was like $400 or $500. You know, lose 2 weeks of work, pay $500, got to do it. So one of the things that's happening is you'll see vendors, and Sophos, who's the partner we work with, is doing this, Symantec has done this, and a lot of the other guys are doing this too. I don't want to say they're giving up on prevention, but that's always been the goal. The goal has always been, how do we prevent infection? How do we prevent inappropriate access? How do we prevent whatever? But now you're starting to hear another term, containment. Okay, they got in, how do we prevent it from doing damage? And that's not to say they're abandoning that first, but they're now adding it to it. And this is actually, this strategy has actually proved pretty effective for ransomware. Because one of the things that ransomware does is when you get infected, a machine that's infected, it then calls out through the internet to get an encryption key from an offshore site. Once it gets that key, then it goes and encrypts data. And I wish I could take credit for it, but some bright people basically said, well, what if we just blocked that type of traffic of getting encryption keys? Because we don't know how the infection's going to happen, but we know how the encryption keys. And that's we can be much more restrictive on that type of traffic, because not everybody goes out and gets keys. So what ends up happening is, in addition to the traditional antivirus and protection, you also have web traffic that looks for traffic going for that type of, whether it be encryption key or to those sites, and it blocks that. So you end up having this infected machine that can't do anything. It can't encrypt anything. So what ends up happening is, yes, you have a machine. The machine is compromised. The machine needs something done to it, but it's been blocked from doing anything heinous. And I've talked to a number of MSPs and groups over the past 5 months or so, and we've implemented as our standard strategy. And so far, it's the best. And again, it's just a couple of steps, not to be confused with everything else that needs to be done, but it's a good strategy, and I know it works. We've seen instances. That doesn't mean because these guys are bright, they're going to go out, they're going to come up with new ideas. But that combination is a great example of how containment is as critical. One of the other things that we're doing now is we're actually using firewall devices that actually integrate with the antivirus software. So they can monitor, and the firewall device is essentially, it blocks the access between this door and the hallway. So we block all the traffic outside of our local network, the local networks. And now what's happening is, it is now, with the devices that we're using, and there's other vendors who are doing similar things, it will monitor the behavior of the desktops, of the devices. And if it sees inappropriate behavior, it will block all other devices from connecting with that workstation. So if the workstation gets compromised and now starts trying to talk to or infect everything, this device will say, no, you can't. So a couple of examples of how containment is now becoming as big of an issue or as big of a strategy as prevention is. Okay? This is big, all right, because we've had almost a bloating of all the traditional tools in terms of ways to just prevent. And now it's like, oh wait, if we let it happen but prevent the damage, contain the damage, makes more sense. Okay? So what you need to make sure of, and this is kind of here, multifaceted security strategies. You've got to have all these in place. So for example, when we take on a client and we become their IT department, we're going to put in tools that's going to make sure that the desktops get patched appropriately so they're up to date on the Windows stuff. We're also going to be putting out updates to make sure that the add-on stuff like Java and Flash, which is where a lot of these things come from, also get patched. We're also going to have the firewall having the services like this, which can do that containment, and we'll make sure that all DNS traffic goes out to sites that maintain a list of here are the bad places you don't want to go there. So kind of by doing all those things, and some more, limiting, administrative access to the desktops, all that. So there's no one layer or one level that without this all fails, or with this all succeeds. It's a combination of things. Does that make sense? Cool. Ransomware as a service. There are companies that will now, we do hardware as a service, software as a service, infrastructure as a service, CIO as a service. That's essentially where you're not buying or developing the tools or materials, you're essentially paying them, renting them almost, as if you will. Well, the bad guys have now developed ransomware as a service. So let's say you want to be a bad guy. You want to make money off this whole ransomware thing because it sounds like fun. But you don't want to actually write ransomware. That sounds like too much work. So now there are third parties who will do the ransomware for you. You essentially go onto their sites, and Bleeping Computer was the first site we found that had a good article on this. And you essentially, well, what do you want to do? If you infect these guys, do you want to show the lock screen before you encrypt? Do you want to slow their CPU down, or do you want to do it slowly in the background so they won't notice? How much money do you want to get? And they have some help screens to guide you. If you put too high an amount of money, it'll say, no, you shouldn't be greedy. Keep it a reasonable price. Now, on the one side, and you remember when I mentioned what I was saying 2 years ago, is what scares me is these guys are businessmen now. And businessmen with crooked schemes are, just think banks and the financial meltdown and all the kind of stuff that was going on. It's a bad combination. So now the bad guys are getting out there with new business models. Yeah. You're screwed. Okay, so here's the problem. Boy, that's a really interesting dilemma. So the question is essentially you end up having this one bubble of infrastructure that's available if you do it through a Wi-Fi. So you're making Wi-Fi available to all of the customers. So you've essentially got one that's going to be available to everybody. Now, you can segment that. If you think about it from a, and I'll say physical, but it's more of a logical, you could segment it so that each, the problem isn't so much are you vulnerable, the problem is that if I live in the apartment next door, and I don't bother putting passwords on anything, I haven't patched, antivirus, why would I need an antivirus, whatever, then someone who's also on that Wi-Fi could, if you take the easy way out in configuration, connect to that person's desktop and do whatever, okay? Whether it be steal information, cause damage to the computer, do whatever. Okay, fine. So instead, let's break it down into segments. So we'll have segmented Wi-Fi, and we're going to actually create IDs for each location, each apartment, so that they really can't. Well, now you've got a lot more overhead to do. And your Wi-Fi equipment is going to have to do a lot more work, so you're going to need bigger equipment. Yeah, but you see that, but it's a great question. Because, and you constantly have, whenever you're talking about security, and security is not just a, I can do harm to you, you can do harm to me. It's also I can access the information back and forth. And the issue with security is anytime you increase the security, you either increase the cost, you decrease the functionality, or you make it more complicated. And there just is no way, there is no middle road or middle ground for that trade-off. And that's one of the things that you as the owner of that bubble have to have in mind. And then how much do you communicate to the customers? And the same thing is here on my standpoint. And the example I use is if you live in an apartment, you're given two keys. You're given a key to the outside, which everybody has. Everybody who lives in this apartment complex gets the same key. It gets you in the apartment building. Why? Because that's where we live. All right, but then you get a key to your apartment. And theoretically, nobody except those people who live in your apartment get that key. And the test that I use when I talk to people about security is, okay, you're walking up, you've got the key, you open up the outside door, and there 5 feet behind you is someone who's got all sorts of, grocery bags. They're obviously, they're carrying a lot of stuff. They're having trouble, and they don't have their key out. What do? If you open the door and you hold the door open for them, and you don't know this person, if you open the door and hold the door open for them, you've just let somebody in. You've committed a breach of security, all right? And if you close the door and you don't let them in and you make them get out the key, you're a jerk. And there really is a trade-off for businesses in terms of that ease of functionality and ease of access. So does that make sense? Ish? Okay. It applies everywhere. It applies everywhere. And also keep in mind that, and again, I'll get back to 25% of the people in this room have malware on your phones. And I'm probably being generous. Because we install anything. We don't care. The experiments, Sophos, who's a security company we deal a lot with, they created a Wi-Fi at a hotel that they called it free Wi-Fi. And in order to connect to the free Wi-Fi, you had to give a credit card. All right? And they would actually do a zero, and they checked to make sure this was cool to do this. And they had, within a day, like 25, 30 people sign up for this free Wi-Fi. That they used like $150 of Best Buy equipment in order to set this up. And you had, within a day, 25 people were willing to share their credit card information because they thought it was free Wi-Fi. We install stuff we shouldn't install. We connect to things we shouldn't connect to. And we do that even though we know better. We're getting smarter at it, but we still got a ways to go. You take that and you put that into that apartment area, how much is your responsibility versus how much is their responsibility? That's going to be one of the big dilemmas. So quick things on Microsoft, what they're doing. Last gasp for Windows Phone. This will be about the third last gasp for Windows Phone that Microsoft has had in as many years. And I have not, I've got my Windows 8 phone here, and I have my Windows 8 phone here. I have not seen the 10 phones yet, and it's one of those where if people take a look at it and they go, wow, that's a really good phone. There's a lot of really cool features there, a lot of really, what are you going to get? Oh, I'm getting an Android. You know, I don't think Windows phones are going to be around in another year or two, but I think I've been saying that for a while, so we'll see. One of the things that they're pinning their hopes on is, in theory, the Windows 10 phones will be able to run Android apps. And also the development tools that are being released now make it much easier for a developer to build an app that will run, it'll be different flavors, but that will run on iPhones, Androids, and Windows phones. So they're hoping that will generate more interest. Oddly enough, apparently the Windows phones actually are doing reasonably well in Europe, but pretty much not anywhere else. Phone services. This is another one I've been saying for 3 years. This is the year, but it actually looks like this is the year, like I've been saying for 3 years. Microsoft bought Skype about 4 years ago, and they had huge plans for Skype as far as integrating that into their small, medium business offerings that were cloud-based, primarily through the 365. But it really wasn't until now, until really last quarter of last year, that they've introduced it. What Microsoft wants to do is they want you to actually get your phone service for your business through Microsoft as part of Office 365. And they introduced, fourth quarter of last year, they introduced what they're calling the E5 plan. The E5 plan, I think, is an additional 20-some bucks. So it ends up being about 45, 50 bucks a month, but that will include an actual phone number and software so people can call a business number. They get your phone, and you can actually program like some of the desktop phones as well. And it's a service. So we're using a service for phone system called RingCentral, which we're paying 20-some bucks a month per line, but it's not as integrated. This is truly part of Office 365. So it can integrate with your Outlook, with your contacts, as far as all that. So this gets rid of the whole idea of a PBX. It technically gets rid of even a cloud PBX. It's all managed through the portal. I am not convinced yet for its scalability for small businesses. I have not had a chance yet to experiment on it for a business that has a traditional cable internet connection or the like, but there's no question it's here now. So this is absolutely where Microsoft was going, and what they're trying to do is they're trying to get rid of all the reasons to have that small business server. And to get rid of, so basically so a small business can actually work completely in the cloud using their services. Okay? Well, they're using Skype as that's part of the technology that is underlying it. So yeah, and they even renamed Link LYNC, because Microsoft can't keep a name straight to save their butts. They renamed their Link conferencing system to Skype for Business. So now they have Skype, and they have Skype for Business. And one of the other things they added, and this is part of the phone offering, is up until November, October for us, and December for everybody else. And actually, it's not rolled out for everybody yet. If you could not get audio on a Skype for Business meeting, you're out of luck. Or you'd have to use a third party. Now, when you set up a Skype for Business meeting, you get a phone number. You can use a phone number and a conference ID so that someone who can't get audio on their computer can actually join in over the phone. And that's now included. It's a toll call, which doesn't matter to most of us, but it's there now and it wasn't there before. So that's been added. You also see a lot of, and this is a shot across the bow to like GoToMeeting and the like, how now you can have a couple thousand people on group meetings in Skype for Business, whereas before you were limited at 250 or 275, I think. So, retiring more software and systems. Really, this gets down into Microsoft is trying to retire everything. Really, 2008 was the year where Microsoft started releasing things in the 2-3 year cycles. So if you take a look at Server 2008 was in 2008, 2008 R2, 2010, 2012, 2012, 2012 R2, 2014, 2016, 2016. So servers every 2 years. Major release, upgrade, major release, upgrade. They did the same thing with Windows Desktop. Office is more of a 3-year, 10, 13, 16. But what's happening now is Microsoft is becoming very, very diligent in terms of releasing upgrades every 2 or 3 years. Okay? As part of that, they are also making more and more of their desktop user functionality, the licensing more and more subscription leaning, and less I'm going to Best Buy and buying it. They've got that to a certain degree with servers, but not hugely. And that's going to continue. So last year, we retired Server 2003 in 2015. The year before that, we retired XP. This year, the biggie is going to be SQL 2005. And by retiring it, what we mean is that there simply is going to be no support and no updates and no patches. Now, as far as the support, probably few people in this room have ever used Microsoft support. We have, because as a partner, we've run into some higher level stuff. But we use it maybe once every 3 years, where there's an issue we can't resolve. However, the updates and supports, especially as far as security, all of that kind of fun stuff, that's an issue. And what's going to end up happening is there are a lot of companies who don't know they have SQL 2005 because they bought an application. Again, we get back to my buddies in manufacturing. They bought an application. That application is running its databases in SQL 2005. They don't know it because it just runs, and they haven't upgraded it, and they're still running SQL 2005. Those guys are going to be some of the challenges that are coming out. They're also coming out, like I said. So we've got Server 2016, Exchange 2016, SharePoint 2016, SQL 2016. And all of them are coming out with both their on-premise and Azure-based versions. So you're going to see Office 365 is going to upgrade to Exchange 2016. And their SharePoint Online will ultimately upgrade to SharePoint 2016. More 365, more Azure, more services. And again, and we were talking about ransomware as a service. Software as a service would be your 365 model. Infrastructure as a service, which is essentially, when you start talking about Azure, you can literally just spin up servers on an as-needed basis with the functions, with the features, with the functionality. So I can either choose to spin up, I want a server that's running SQL. Boom, I'm just going to go and pay for a SQL server running in Azure. I really don't need a server, I just need SQL. Okay, now instead of that, I'm going to just spin up SQL as a service so I can connect to it through applications, connection strings, and the like. The second one is less expensive because less resources are being allocated to me. The first one, I have more control over. Both of them are available as a service. That's going to continue, that's going to increase. But one of the things that is going to happen, I think more so, is various vendors have done infrastructure hardware as a service. It's easy to do for servers, for server level services. It's easy to do for firewalls, for backups, all that good stuff. The one thing that hasn't gone through fully yet for small, medium businesses is desktops as a service. And what I mean by that is where you use this computer here and you don't actually run anything on this. You simply connect, and this can be a dumb terminal even. You connect to a server out in the cloud that is pretending to be your desktop. It's virtualizing your desktop. And that means that all you need is a good internet connection. Doesn't even have to be great, just a decent internet connection, and you can run any software on any machine. You don't have to worry about upgrading, you don't have to worry about backing this guy up, don't have to worry about doing anything. Now, there are a lot of vendors out there offering this service because it's great. You don't have to, it gets rid of all the issues that you have as far as supporting and maintaining people's hardware. Yeah, because this can become disposable. But what's happened is the plans and the pricing have so far really been aimed at the medium-sized businesses and greater. As far as the management tools, the costs, all that kind of fun stuff, you've been looking at the desktop pricing, $100 a month per desktop user. And that's, you still have to get them the hardware, you still have to do the configuration, you have to do other things. So it's been priced and packaged and bundled and managed, I think, out of the ballpark for those smaller, medium companies, especially the company that's looking at, yeah, I've got 4 workstations and I've got this old server, can I get rid of it? the pricing, especially when someone's looking at and they haven't spent a dime on infrastructure for 6 years, and now you're going to ask them to spend $100 a month per workstation, and that's just the starting point. That's a tough sell. I think Microsoft, and again, there's a lot of third parties who are doing it, and we literally get calls and emails weekly, if not more so, by companies wanting us to partner with them. And my problem is that as soon as Amazon, and Amazon has actually started, they're in a better part than Microsoft is yet, as soon as they get it so that their management of the service, they can offer those services at a lesser cost, all those guys in the middle are just going to, they're going to fall like, you know, bowling pins. And that, I think, is going to happen. You've already seen changes to Microsoft's licensing in the past 6 months. They're still not there yet. And this will introduce really that office in a cloud. And by that, your organization can run in the cloud, whether you're all here working out of the same building or you're all working everywhere. As opposed to right now where you have people working all across the world and all that, and the collaboration tools are there, but it's still, you don't still have that centralized office configuration. So I think that's going to be a big change or a big improvement that happens there. Business intelligence. I've made a huge point of talking about the difference between data and information. Data is the yellow pages, you know, the white pages, Encyclopedia Britannica. It's all of this stuff that's just, actually not the encyclopedia, because that is formatted. It's this raw set of numbers that we don't really have value to because we're not doing anything with it. If you're a physics person, it's potential energy versus kinetic energy, okay? It's when you turn it into information. Information holds value to the beholder. A report is information. It answers a question or questions. And for a long time, that's been the issue. BI answers questions. And the question may be appropriate. It may be something we ask the same question each beginning of each month. What was last month's sales? Okay? The data is this table that has line item detail of purchases. The information is our sales were up 5% versus the previous month. And here's the detail behind it. But now we're talking context. And the context is the question is the same question, but we're asking it at a certain point. So we're actually we want it to be situationally driven. And so and I'm gonna pick on you as far as the apartments and all that kind of fun stuff. If you basically said, okay, can I see how many units that we have that are connected to the internet? Okay, great. Can I see an alert telling me how many units are connected to the internet when the speed per unit starts dropping to a point where it's no longer useful to the tenants? Because at that point I've got a problem. So I want my data to tell me that there's a problem and give me information so I can solve the problem. It's the same information, but the context, the way I want to see it, and the conditions why I want to see it are vastly different. And we've talked about this a little bit, but the BI, the whole concept of business intelligence, has never embraced it. They've basically left it up to the data analysts or the report generators or whatever. You're going to see more and more of the tools that are actually going to get into that concept, especially when you look at big data. And the example that I use, it's my favorite, is when before I got into my whole holding my breath in to look like I lost weight, I actually did do a walk around a track a couple of times. Then I got bored. Yeah, but I had my Android phone with me, and I was just listening to music, and I wasn't signed up for anything, whatever. And I got about 3 rounds around the track, and an ad popped up wanting to know if I wanted to buy a pedometer. Now think about that. This data, obviously it's taking a look at where's my position on the planet? And what am I doing? I'm walking around in ovals or circles. Why would somebody be doing that? They might be trying to get healthy. So the third parties involved all had these agreements that ended up with some manufacturer of pedometers who probably never thought of this. But somebody essentially said, when the customer behavior, when the data representing the customer behavior falls under this context, let's take this action. Now, I did not buy a pedometer. I'm obviously not walking around the tracks as much as I should. But the potential, the closing potential, is significantly higher for someone who is doing what I was doing than for just sending it to somebody. And the company that makes the pedometers pays for these. And they pay a rate. But if the person who owns the data can guarantee the quality of the data, they can charge a much higher rate. And the data's sitting there, so it's usable. So one of the things, and we had a meeting with a potential client yesterday where we were talking about this, is one of the things is companies are sitting, small, medium companies are sitting on these huge databases that have 2, 3, 4 years of data. And all they did was they used it to compare performance from one net period to another, or they do it just to process their business. But to ask the questions, to sit there and say, what are these circumstances? What are these situations? And the tools that are available as far as the BI and the mindset is there, that while we can do a lot more, and it's not expensive. You know, BI tools is actually a component of Office 365. For not a lot of monthly funds, you can add it, which is going to give that user, that subscriber, access. They still need to have access to the SQL data or whatever database they're using. But the tools are there. And they're very powerful. This is going to continue. So what I mean by this, and this is going to continue, and this is going to actually increase significantly. You got these big guys, SAS, SAP, all that. And all of this is can be cloud-based, can be on-premise. Then you've got all of these services and sites and the commodities. And you'll notice you've got every platform available in this slide. I stole this from AVG, by the way. So you've got them using laptops, you've got them using desktops, you've got them using tablets, you've got them using mobile devices, you know, more phone-like. And every one of them, we want to have some level of experience. And you're going to hear more and more of the use of the term, we used to call them all UI, user interface. And now we call it UX, user experience. The experience being, how successful was I in getting what I needed out of this thing? If I was successful and it didn't take much effort, the more success I get in terms of what I get out of it versus the less hassle, the better. You know, and that doesn't mean that there are some developers especially who think that the one interface fits the world. Absolutely not. But the issue is that we have, you know, we're living in what I call Henry Ford's nightmare. You can have any color car you want as long as it's black. That cannot work today. Any company who has that mindset will be out of business. Because the customer, we'll just call them, whether it be the users, and this user can be the customer, it can be the vendor, it can be the employee, it can be whatever, is going to have a wide variety of resources they want to access, and they want to access it on a wide variety of devices. And some of those devices offer us challenges as far as the experience in terms of what they can get out of this, both in terms of its limited functionality, as far as, you know, it's not that powerful a processor, not that much memory, and also, and in some ways more so, the real estate. It's a small screen. So the functionality here versus the functionality that I've got on my laptop are very different. And if you've got an app that is, let's say, the insurance app, you know that, I think it's State Farm, whatever, where the kid wrecked the car or damaged the car, and they joke, because Mom, I'm going to tell you about apps. And oh, Mom's smarter than I am. Hey, and Dad's a tyrant. But they talk about this mobile app that allows you to take pictures of the damage to the car and immediately post it online. Well, if they made that application to run best on a laptop, they're idiots. Because it's a picture of the car after an accident. The odds are I'm going to want to use this. Okay? So you make that application so it runs best on a mobile device. Because that's the circumstance and condition that we're going to want to see it. Okay, now I want to do a side-by-side comparison of the performance of these annuities over the last 3 years, plus I want that linked automatically to any news sources that have information about the... No, that's not going to work well on a phone. So we're going to want that application more focused on this guy. Now, we may have a stripped-down version that will do some of that here, and we may have a ramped-up version that will do the accident reporting on here. But we need to understand when and where we want people to access. And that's going to continue. And one of the things is it's getting easier because of the development tools. It is getting easier to build applications that will work similarly across multiple platforms. Again, Visual Studio, the last version of Visual Studio, will work reasonably well across absolutely the Android and the Windows platform. And then here's the other one I wanted to show you. So here we've got an example of a company where they could have users who need access to every one of these sites. Now, in some cases, it may be credentials that the user has. They have their own Facebook account. In some cases, it may be an account that it's the same account for the whole company. And in some cases, it's your corporate account, but it's made up for you. And I want to use all these applications on all my devices. So I have to know or have access to the username and password for every one of these on every one of my devices. And if I'm managing it for an organization, I need to keep track of that for every one of the employees. Well, thankfully, God invented Post-it notes. Because it doesn't happen. It's not going to work. So you're seeing more and more technologies, and we're actually starting to look into this ourselves. We actually already have it on one platform. We're going to add it to another pretty soon. For SSO, single sign-on. And what this technology does is this technology allows an organization to create a portal that has access, and then the administrator maintains the portal for all their employees, puts in all the credentials for their employees to use that are centrally managed. For the applications that the employee has their own credentials, you can let the employee do that. And then this portal is accessible on all devices. So essentially, if you have a client or if you have an employee who starts working for you on Monday, you can put in all the credentials for that user here on this board. They'll never have to enter it. They'll never know what their Salesforce account is. They will only go to this portal. That way, if that employee ever leaves, the only thing you have to do is take away access to this portal. But you also let them add their own applications if they want to. And that way they can keep track of their own passwords and accounts through this as well. And this is a technology that's becoming more and more prevalent. Again, we're an AVG partner, so we like the AVG SSO, or you guys will once we start introducing you to. We just started working with this a couple weeks ago. But we like the direction. Because the challenge is, and honestly, it's an understandable one. If you try to have someone keep track of all 30, 40 accounts and passwords, and especially if they're the same password throughout the company, and you're going to expect them to do that for their laptop, their desktop, their tablet, and their phone, and you're expecting them to do that in a secure fashion, and we want them to be productive. So we think these solutions are going to get better and better. And then actually the final thing I wanted to remind everybody of, because this isn't going away, and that's plumbing. We tend to forget, especially when we're having these high-level, highfalutin conversations, we forget plumbing. And plumbing is essentially, we're talking about, anytime we talk about whether it be cloud, online, on-prem, any of this stuff, we're talking about transmitting information, transmitting data from one site to another, from one device to another. And by and large, when we are transmitting within an area, within a local office, and especially if we are actually connected by wire, we are usually connecting by at least 100, if not 1,000 megabits per second. A bit being a 1 or a 0, so 1 billion, which is 1,000 megabits, 1 billion bits per second. Pretty darn fast. Okay? Cool. So if I've got a server here that's got information, I'm going to get that information pretty quickly. If I go up to the internet, I'm actually going up to the internet and then from the internet to wherever my destination is hosted. And let's say my site, depending upon my internet connection, is probably somewhere at best between 1 and 20 megabits per second. And everybody in the company is using that pipe when they do anything on the internet. So I went from 1,000 megabits per second to 20. Huge, on a good day. Huge, huge decrease in speed. So when we talk about something being on-premise versus on the cloud, we lose an economy of speed automatically. And that's even if, 20 megabits per second is an okay fiber connect. And I'm talking about upload and download speeds. Upload speeds are usually slower, especially if you go cable or the like. So if I have a remote user who's working from home and they're connecting here, and I've got an okay cable connection, so I'll even say I've got 5 meg up and down, which is not bad. Again, small, medium business. This person is probably uploading at 1, maybe downloading at 5. So their experience, and then you have delays in the cloud. Traffic is not always clear. So this person's experience to get the exact same file that this person is night and day. And I want to be very, very clear here. There are a lot of ways to manage that, whether it be VPN connection, remote desktop, terminal server, virtual, synchronization, ton of it. But at the end of the day, you need to understand this core issue when you're talking about connection functionality and whether to go to the cloud or the like. Okay, because every time we go, whether we go to a cloud provider, and cloud providers usually spend a ton of money to have fast connections, but they also have a ton of people, like Azure. Whereas if you're connecting to another office, whether it be another office within your organization, or it be another vendor or customer or the like, you need to know what this speed is, you need to know what this speed is, and you also need to know how busy they are. 4-lane highway's great unless there's more than 4 lanes of traffic. Now, one of the things that there are tools to do, just as an alternative, is to instead do synchronization. And what synchronization would do is it would have data stored here. It would then, as time anybody makes changes to the data, it would then replicate that to anybody else who needed it. And when this person needs access to the data, it would already be on their computer. So we use that a fair amount here. So I have a copy of all of the documentation that we need, or that I've decided I needed. I have a copy of it, and I can work on it offline or online. And what will happen then is once I save the document, it'll get automatically synchronized from the cloud and then down to whoever else is synchronizing that data. There's a lot of options and opportunities to do that. My key thing here is just be aware, especially when someone starts talking about the cloud as if it's a no-brainer and it's just everybody wins and there's never an issue. The plumbing, and you can't get around the plumbing. There's tricks you can do, but it's still there, if that makes sense. Okay? Cool, and we're actually close to out of time. Okay, cool. Thank you all. Yay.